My father's birthday always felt less like a celebration and more like a reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy, somewhere between the old recliner no one used and the attic filled with things no one cared enough to throw away. Yet somehow, year after year, I came home. I kept telling myself it was duty, or loyalty, or love. But looking back, I think I just kept hoping that maybe this time he'd see me. Maybe this time he'd say something kind. Maybe this time I wouldn't walk away feeling smaller than when I arrived. But hope is a cruel thing when placed in the wrong hands. The dining room glowed in warm yellow light, the kind meant to make everyone look softer, happier, more like a family than we actually were. A long oak table stretched across the room, crowded with relatives who all seemed louder and more confident once they had an audience. The table was set perfectly, my mother's doing, no doubt. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, for him. Everything always revolved around him. My father stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared as if he were about to deliver a speech of national importance. His glass caught the light, and for a moment, the room fell silent. Even the laughter from the kitchen died down. The air shifted, tightening. I knew that silence well. It was the quiet right before he struck, never physically, always verbally, always precisely. He cleared his throat and gave one of those practiced smiles that never reached his eyes. "Some kids make you proud," he began, savoring every word like fine wine. People leaned in, expecting another one of his signature, crowd-pleasing jokes. He paused, just long enough to build suspense, just long enough to let my heart slide down into my stomach. Others just take up space. The laughter exploded instantly, sharp, loud, and merciless. My uncle slapped the table so hard the silverware rattled. My aunt giggled behind her wine glass as if she didn't want to be seen enjoying it too much. Even my cousins, who knew how many times I covered for their mistakes, joined in, snorting, choking, shaking with amusement. The sound sliced through me like thin, precise blades. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to scar. My mother didn't laugh. She stood behind my father, her hands trembling as she rearranged forks that didn't need rearranging. Her eyes stayed down, pinned to the tablecloth, as if looking at me might be too painful, or too dangerous. She had spent years pretending not to see the damage as long as the house stayed quiet. I didn't laugh either. I just sat there, my spine straight, my hands neatly folded in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my skin. I'd learned how to hide pain early, how to swallow it without letting it show. But something felt different this time. Something inside me, a small, exhausted thing that had been ignored for years, finally lifted its head. I stood slowly, lifting my own glass. My fingers didn't shake. My voice didn't quiver. "Well," I said, forcing a pleasant smile, "good thing I just got my own place 3,000 miles away." The room fell silent. A silence so thick it almost hummed. My father blinked, not expecting a response, especially not one that didn't crumble. I set my napkin down gently and added, "Don't worry, you'll never have to deal with me taking up your space again." And then I walked out. The walls seemed to echo behind me as I moved, every insult, every dismissal, every quiet moment where I felt like a ghost in the house I grew up in. But with each step toward the door, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something heavy. Something that had been there far too long. When I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a baptism. For the first time in my life, leaving didn't feel like running away. It felt like freedom. My new apartment was barely bigger than my childhood bedroom, but it felt like a country I had invented myself. A small one-bedroom on the second floor of an aging building with peeling paint and stairs that creaked like old bones. My mattress sat directly on the floor. My kitchen consisted of a mini fridge, a thrifted microwave, and a stool that wobbled when I breathed too close to it. Still, stepping into that space, I felt something I had never felt in my parents' house. I felt safe. On the first night, I sat cross-legged on the carpet, scratchy and mismatched from years of previous tenants, and let the unfamiliar hum of the city settle around me. The distant sirens, the soft whir of traffic, the occasional footsteps in the hall. It wasn't the suffocating silence of home, it was alive. It was indifferent, but in a strangely comforting way. It didn't judge. It didn't belittle. It simply existed, and it allowed me to exist too. Freedom sounded nothing like I expected. It sounded like nothing pressing down on me. But freedom didn't erase years of damage. It didn't undo the words carved into my mind, the ones my father had etched there so casually. Healing wasn't a single moment, it was 1,000 small moments, some sharp, some quiet, some exhausting. The mornings were the hardest. Because that was when silence gave my thoughts too much room. I'd wake from dreams where my father's voice echoed, "You just take up space." And for a few minutes, before I reminded myself where I was, I would feel myself shrinking inside my own skin. But then I'd get up, pad across the cold floor, make instant coffee, and open my laptop to apply for jobs. Eventually, a cafe downtown hired me for morning shifts. The work was simple: brew coffee, wipe tables, refill pastries. But it gave me routine. It gave me purpose. And the customers, many regulars, gave me kindness I didn't know how to absorb. There was the elderly woman who always tipped $1 extra for the smile I made her morning with. There was the college kid who complimented my earrings. There was the manager who told me, "You're easy to work with, Isla." Reliable. Reliable. A word I had always heard twisted into a chore back home. Here, it felt different. It felt like praise. After work, I'd return to my tiny apartment and draw. At first, it was just doodles, messy lines, clumsy shapes, sketches of emotions I didn't know how to verbalize. But over time, the drawings shifted. They grew cleaner, sharper, more honest. Entire stories spilled out of my pen. Memories. Pain. Hope. I drew myself as a child hiding behind her own shadow. I drew a girl unlocking a cage made of words. I drew a woman stepping into the sunlight with her eyes finally open. I didn't show anyone at first. Those drawings felt like pieces of me, raw pieces, fragile pieces. But one night, during a late shift at the cafe, I doodled on a napkin without thinking and left it on the counter. A customer picked it up and asked who drew it. "It's beautiful," she said. "Do you sell your art?" The question startled me. Sell? As in, it had value? I hesitated, then nodded. She bought it on the spot. That one napkin led to her asking for a custom piece. And then another customer asked. And then a friend of theirs reached out online. And slowly, quietly, like a flower blooming at midnight, something began to grow. A community. A following. A tiny flame inside me that whispered, "Maybe you're not just taking up space. Maybe you're meant to fill it." But healing isn't linear. Some nights I cried in the shower, letting water drown thoughts I wasn't ready to face. Some days I walked miles aimlessly because sitting still made the old doubts too loud. Still, every morning I woke up in my little apartment, the light creeping in through thin curtains, and I remembered. I chose this life. I wasn't trapped anymore. And for the first time, I was becoming someone I recognized, someone I liked. Someone my father never thought I could be. Success did not arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrived quietly, like dawn creeping under a curtain, unnoticed until suddenly the whole room was filled with light. At first, my art existed only in the small corner of my apartment where the sun hit the floor at just the right angle. I'd sit cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by sheets of paper and open pens, letting hours slip by without noticing. The act of drawing had become a form of breathing, steady, necessary, cleansing. What I didn't realize at the time was that the world was watching. It started when a regular from the cafe posted one of my pieces on social media with the caption, "Found a gem today." She tagged me in it, and I watched in disbelief as the likes rolled in. Comments. Shares. Questions about commissions. I thought it was a fluke. But then a small online art collective invited me to submit. Then a blogger requested an interview. Then a gallery reached out to see if I'd display a few pieces at a local showcase. Every time something good happened, I expected it to vanish the next morning. That was what childhood taught me, to distrust good things, to wait for them to turn sour. But these victories didn't disappear. They repeated. They grew. They built. Soon I was working the cafe only part-time. The rest of my week belonged to my art, my time, my talent, my voice. Something I created without permission, without approval, and without fear of judgment. And still, despite everything changing around me, one thing didn't change. My family stayed silent. Months passed without a single message. Then a year. Then 2. Until the day the silence broke. I received a text from my mother, short, clipped, careful. We saw your interview. Your father is proud. He wants to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. Proud? The word didn't fit him. It felt like a coat he wasn't meant to wear. 2 days later, my cousin messaged. Your dad's business isn't doing great. It would mean a lot if you could visit. You're doing so well now, maybe you could help. Ah. There it was. The truth behind the sudden interest. More messages followed. Aunts. Uncles. Even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me since I was 12. All expressing a strange mixture of concern and expectation, as if I were suddenly the glue that would fix everything. But I knew better. In my family, love was transactional. Approval was a tool. And I had stopped being a tool the moment I walked out of that dining room. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't care. But a part of me, the part that still held on to the child inside, wondered what my father thought now. Whether he remembered that birthday toast. Whether the words he used to slice me open ever haunted him the way they haunted me. A few months later, something unexpected happened. A major brand commissioned a full collection. They wanted a mural. Prints. Packaging designs. It was overwhelming, thrilling, and terrifying in all the right ways. It demanded travel, meetings, and contracts I had only dreamed of signing. It was the kind of success I used to think only happened to people whose parents believed in them. I remember sitting on my apartment floor, still the same scratchy carpet, though now covered in art supplies, and realizing something profound. Everything I had built had been without them. Everything I had become was because I chose myself. With every new opportunity, every gallery showing, every message from someone saying my art made them feel seen, the voice of my father grew fainter. His opinion mattered less. His approval, once the compass I tried so hard to follow, was now irrelevant. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about outgrowing. And I had outgrown them. Still, when the next message came, an invitation to a small family gathering, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not guilt. Something else. Readiness. Not to mend the past, but to face it. To confront the ghosts. To stand in front of the people who once convinced me I was worthless, and prove them wrong simply by existing. So I accepted. Not for them. For the girl I used to be, the one who sat at a dinner table and believed she took up too much space. She deserved closure. She deserved to see how far she'd come. And she deserved to walk into that room as someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to shine. I arrived at my childhood home the same way a ghost enters a place it once haunted, quietly, without belonging to it anymore. The house looked smaller than I remembered, as if shrinking was something it had done in my absence. The paint was fading, the front steps cracked, and the garden, my mother's pride, had wilted into tired, brittle stalks. Funny how things fall apart when the one holding them together finally stops pretending. My knock echoed through the hallway. For a moment, no one came. Then the door cracked open, and my mother stood there, hands fluttering nervously, eyes wide with surprise and something that looked suspiciously like relief. "Isla," she whispered, voice trembling. "You came." I said I would, I answered simply. She pulled me into a soft, hesitant hug. It felt unfamiliar, too gentle compared to the years of tense silence we had shared. I hugged her back anyway. Some wounds don't ask for explanations, they just want warmth. Inside, the house smelled the same, lemon cleaner and the faint lingering scent of my father's aftershave. I almost expected to hear him barking orders, complaining about the thermostat, demanding attention like a child trapped in a grown man's body. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. My mother ushered me toward the dining room. Of course it had to be the dining room. The scene of the crime. The place where my father had publicly carved me into a punchline. Relatives filled the table again, though now their conversations were low and strained. I recognized their expressions, thin smiles, forced cheer, curiosity sharpened with guilt. They were assessing me. Comparing me to their memories of a girl who once shrank into shadows. But I didn't shrink anymore. I walked in with steady steps and a calm heart, wearing confidence like a second skin. Their eyes followed me, widening slightly as if they hadn't expected success to change a person's posture so completely. Then I saw him. My father. Time had not been gentle with him. His hair had grayed, his shoulders curved, and his eyes, once so sharp and commanding, looked tired, almost hollow. For a moment, the sight pulled something in my chest. Not pity. Not forgiveness. Something closer to distance, like looking at an old photograph of someone you used to know. He stood up when he saw me, clearing his throat as if preparing to give another speech. "Isla," he said, voice softer than I remembered. "You look good. Not proud. Not sorry. Just surprised." "I'm doing well," I said. The words tasted like victory. Dinner passed in awkward fragments. Small talk. Forced laughter. Relatives asking vague questions about my career, each one pretending they'd followed it more closely than they had. My father barely spoke, except for the occasional stolen glance, as if trying to piece together how the girl he dismissed had become this woman. When dessert was served, he finally found his courage. "You never call anymore," he said. I set my fork down slowly. The room fell silent, waiting. "You never taught me how," I replied. "Only how to disappear." A quiet gasp rippled from someone at the table. My father stiffened, shame flickering across his face like a storm cloud passing over sunlit water. He opened his mouth, searching for excuses. "I didn't mean." I stopped him with a gentle, unmistakably final smile. "Which part?" I asked softly. "Telling everyone I just took up space? Or making sure I believed it?" He swallowed hard. His eyes dropped. Silence answered for him. And that was enough. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need validation. I didn't need anything from him anymore. I stood, smoothing my dress, feeling lighter than I had in years. "It was good to see you all," I said, meaning none of it. "But I should go. I have a life to get back to." My mother touched my arm gently, as if afraid I would vanish again. "Will you come back?" she whispered. I gave her a small smile. "Maybe. But on my terms." My father looked up at me then, eyes wet, mouth trembling with words he didn't know how to say. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. But I didn't need it.